lots of people don't really want to come to terms with the fact that they are going to go through a grieving process, whether they understand it as grief or not. They know the emotions that they could be setting themselves up to feel. And I think the best way that we've found for the people that are in our community anyway, and everyone's totally different. Some people respond really well to like hard-hitting, straight up, quite like shocking information. And some people need to be invited in a bit more gently. So we think that humour is a good way to invite people in and not be scared of the like grief process that they're gonna encounter at some point. And our work's honest, and we still list the like hard truths, but for some people they just need a bit more of a gentle nudge in.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. Hi, this is Dan. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the show. This is episode 37. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Josie Tucker and Richard Ashton, the founders of Adapt Climate Club. More on them shortly. So we're in August. There's been a little pause between the last episode and this episode, mainly due to the fact it's been quite busy in the Spaceship Earth shed, juggling many sort of work-life missions, which is all fine. But also it's been a time for me to reflect a little bit on the podcast and what next. I started this podcast in 2018 as a bit of an experiment. I've released 43 episodes so far. Of those, 5 of them were me talking to myself, often in the woods or by the sea. 29 episodes talking at length with some extraordinary humans doing amazing things on the Spaceship Earth. 1 episode was an outside broadcast at a climate strike. 7 episodes featured 30 amazing people from 4 continents who sent me in their reflections around the pandemic lockdown, and 1 episode actually was a sort of deep cosmic house mix, which I put out just after the election results, trying to sort of ease the pain. So anyway, a lot has been learned. I've enjoyed doing them. The listenership is growing. People seem to be enjoying them too, but I feel like it's at a moment of reflection and maybe a chance to maybe reboot with a slightly different phase for the podcast. So that's what I'm planning on doing in the autumn. I put a little post out. I'm actually seeking a bit of a crew to help me with that. So if you check out the Instagrams, you'll find that. But time to give it a little bit of a polish and an iteration, and then I've got absolutely loads of brilliant people lined up for more conversations, so all good. In the spirit of that, I am also planning to start a Patreon around the podcast to see if any listeners might want to contribute something, some form of donation to the ongoing efforts of the podcast, which would actually end up supporting some of the crew to help me edit and put this podcast out, because it does take actually a pretty large amount of time to do this frequently, and so that is where I'm at, and hopefully that will all start to happen in the autumn. But on that note, if you are a regular listener or any listener, or you like what I'm trying to do here with this podcast, it would be amazing if you could give us just a quick review or a rating on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Acast or Google Podcasts, wherever you access it on. Just it'll take you like a minute or 2 minutes, just a quick review, a quick rating, and it really helps surface the podcast to more listeners, and we get more listeners, and it just kind of helps the whole thing swing. So that's my request. Much gratitude if you might do that. Okay, onwards to episode 37. So this was recorded back in June during sort of coming out of lockdown, if I can remember rightly, or going back in, who knows. But this is with a conversation I had with Josie Tucker and Richard Ashton, who are 2 brilliant creative humans and climate activists, and they the founders of Adapt Climate Club, which calls itself a climate club, a creative organisation. They use design, lots of humour, contemporary culture to kind of engage people in climate issues in a new way, and their mission is to run Adapt in order to share knowledge, encourage action, and build a community of motivated activists. They have this really amazing growing community of people. They are prolific in their work. Really inspiring duo. They were listed last year by the British Council as 10 Emerging Designers 2019. They've been featured in all over the web in lots of interesting media platforms, and they are epic, just so dedicated to the climate cause and constantly exploring how to help the climate issues travel further, wider, and engage more people in the action we desperately need. So, on that note, I'm going to cut to it. This is episode 37 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Josie Tucker and Richard Ashton from Adapt Climate Club. Enjoy. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? So, Josie, Richard, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to connect. We've tried this, haven't we, a few times. We've tried to get this one happening for what's probably like months, actually. Might even be more. It might even be over a year. But for whatever reasons, we never quite did it.
Yeah, many curveballs thrown by.
I know. There's been a few crises going on. But what I want to do is, before we get into Adapt today, and before we get into a little bit about your story, because we are living in these sort of, slightly surrealer times every week, it seems to get more and more surreal. But I'd just love to know a little bit about, just how you're doing. Where are you right now? And could you give us a little sense of what life's been like for you the last few weeks?
Yes, actually, currently we are camping in my parents' garden outside of London. Because we've been in London pretty much the whole time throughout lockdown, and then we really wanted to see my family, but for this particular reason, we can't go inside. So actually, they've set up a bell tent for us in their garden, and we're spending a couple of days here. So we're really kind of being with the outdoors. It's just quite fun.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes the difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels really luxurious after spending like the whole of lockdown sort of like in grubby Peckham. As much as we love Peckham, but we're suddenly now in the middle of the countryside. So yeah,
it feels like a holiday actually. So actually, Rich, when things are kind of taken away from you or you can't do things, just having a bell tent in a garden is actually a really nice thing.
Yeah, and what have you actually? It's because it's quite a shift, I imagine, from, like you say, from sort of Peckham to sort of countryside. And what have you noticed more about that transition, and what have you really picked up on being in the bell tent?
Definitely the noises of nature, just even in the back garden. Like we've been noticing an increase in the sound of birds in London anyway, but like it's nothing compared to here. Hearing like hedgehogs rustling around us and like squirrels and stuff going to sleep, which is quite funny. And yeah, the air quality is really nice. You can just take a big breath in and it's not full of like horrible particles.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? So bird song and clean air, and it's like, yeah, and you sort of really noticed that actually during it seemed like there was a lot of folks had sort of tuned in to these kind of really simple things that were actually sort of becoming more noticeable, and actually going, wow, actually these things have a really interesting impact on us as human beings. And yeah, excellent. So listen, what I want to do is before we get into the Adapt story, what we do, always really intrigued, and people are always intrigued, listeners are always intrigued in people's own journeys into what what they're doing right now. So can you guys give us a bit of like, how did you get to Adapt? What was the storyline for you? That would be lovely to have a bit of that journey.
Yeah, so it was a few years ago now. I think we've been saying 2 years for now 3 years, so I think it must be about 3 years. But basically, both me and Rich were doing our masters and in different places, and I was looking into the use of humour as a communication tool in graphic design. That's what I was like researching into, and was just like really astounded at how important using humor is when you're trying to win people around or encourage them to remember and take things in and act on what they're learning. And there's a study, I think it was by Harvard, where they tested the memory retention of students being taught by a teacher, both using humour and then not using humour, and the difference of what they could remember when they were taught using humour was up to 50% more knowledge. So that just really stuck with me, and graphic design being quite a dry industry generally. There's like branches of visual communication that's really fun and interesting, but graphic design on its own tends to be quite boring. So in terms of like humour, and at that time it felt like the world was falling apart, and it still does, so not much change. But it was the first time I was really aware of just how serious the climate crisis was. But I was sort of looking around me in my studio and on my course, and nobody was talking about climate change. It just felt like it had been completely swept under the rug. And so I sort of finished my master's, felt a bit incomplete with what I was doing, because I was studying like subcultures and like the lack of subcultures now. And then I sort of put everything together and thought, hang on, you can use humour, create a sort of like climate subculture, and try and bring this conversation to the fore, because it just wasn't really reaching beyond the level of people that were already interested in the environment. So yeah, we just basically teamed up and invited loads of people around to our house, got a bit drunk and started to just all rant about how worried we were about the planet. And it was really refreshing just to know that people weren't talking about it, but they were feeling it. So from then on, basically, we just tested lots of ideas, did workshops, started building projects, and it's been a long process of testing things out and trying to figure out what the best way is to communicate climate change, like what people respond to, how they want to be involved. And sort of, creating a club or like a subculture in a way of climate activism that's cultural and funny and lighthearted.
What is it about? And Richie, you can probably, it'd be good to get your sort of view of this as well. But what is it about humour? Because that's such an interesting insight about like what we remember through humour. And what's kind of going on behind that? Like there must be something deeper happening about how we kind of experience information, or I don't know. Have you got more of a sense of what is it that's actually driving that sort of ability for humour to kind of land with people, or for people to remember, or to sort of engage with things?
I guess in a way, so we always kind of think possibly the idea that your mind. I'm not, again, this is not based on a huge amount, but the idea that your mind's more relaxed at the time, and you sort of, so you're more reluctant to sort of take things in, but then at the same time, I guess when it's funny, you're creating like fond memories as you probably go forward. So you're going to hopefully try and remember things. You'll continue to form those fond memories, and if you kind of alter them a little bit. So hopefully that's kind of why it maybe sticks with people a bit more. Yeah. And then I guess in terms of like using humor for us, it's really about, it helps people deal with something that is actually almost like very crippling in a way. Just the idea of like, obviously dealing with the climate crisis, not knowing what to do, having days where you can't really even process everything that's going on. To be able to kind of then translate that into humor allows us to deal with it, but then hopefully allows other people to also feel that they can sort of laugh or find humor in a really dire situation. And then also that, I guess that then forms a bit of a community, the fact that we're all kind of feeling sort of kind of like a deep sense of, I don't know, frustration or sadness, but then also together we're trying to have a laugh, or like trying to bring something into that. So then, yeah, hopefully kind of everyone feels connected in a way, and we're all kind of like sharing some sort of joke or something, or we're kind of laughing at something similar. And I think that hopefully forms a sense of community, which is kind of what we've always tried to do. And we'd like as well.
And yeah, continuing from that as well, I just wanted to say, because it's a really interesting point that Rich brought up about like helping people deal with their feelings. And I think like apparently scientists still don't really know why we laugh and why we find things funny, but one of the major theories is that we laugh to diminish the fear of something. So one example that's always used is like the elephant and the mouse. Why is it so funny that elephants are scared of mice? Is because they're so big and they could be a potential threat to us. So we laugh when we see that they are scared of something smaller. And I think that that's a really nice way to look at dealing with climate change, because if you can laugh and act at the same time, you're diminishing your fear, and it actually just makes you a bit more powerful in a way.
It's super interesting, and I think I've got a feeling we're going to dig into more of this kind of humor versus kind of fear and sort of, you know, grief and fear and humor and stuff, because it's all so tied up, isn't it? But it's interesting, this sense of like this opening up maybe that occurs through this kind of more through the use of humor. It's sort of allowing people to maybe open up a bit more to these things initially, which is interesting. So you call yourselves, like, you call Adapt, you call it a climate club, right? So tell us a bit about that, and or just for the listeners, I mean, I know about your work, but just explain a bit, kind of about the thinking of approaching your work in this way.
I guess because even though over the last few years we've developed ways of working, developed new ways of doing things and stuff, and it's only really been me and Joe's over the last year or two that have really been running things. Like, the idea of the climate club still exists from our initial idea of the meetings and getting everyone's input at the beginning. So we kind of have taken that forward. And then what we always try and do is, even though there's two of us, we're always, on the big projects we do, we're always trying to look to collaborate with as many designers, artists, researchers as possible. And the idea of that, we're all kind of forming this ongoing club, which is kind of dealing with climate in new ways. We're bringing people into a conversation that they may not necessarily have been talking about before. And then on top of that, obviously, we're very present on social media, on Instagram, which wasn't our intention when we initially started Adapt, but it's kind of gone that way. And it's become like our big testing bed for climate conversations and stuff. So we've kind of built a big community on there. And the idea of being a club is like, you know, it's kind of for everyone. And what we try and do is like really, rather than go, when people come and find Adapt, we hope we're just kind of bringing them into the conversation, bringing that first step, and we can try and encourage them to research more. We can teach them from just what we know, because when we started Adapt, and obviously maybe our knowledge has grown as we've done it, but we're by no means experts. So we're researching all the time, and then we're passing that on, and then people can pass it on, and then people can pass it on to others, and hopefully that is kind of forms this whole idea of being a club in like quite. It's not like a literal club. It's just like an overarching thing, which we're hopefully just bringing people into the conversation on climate change.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, you know, your work is kind of surfacing. I've been sort of following your journey and seeing it. You know, you're sort of surfacing and popping up all over. I think it was the British Council had you down. You know, in their sort of 10 emerging designers of 2019, and you've got lots of work that you're doing, which we'll dig into some of the specific projects and stuff. But just before that, what about you guys together? Like, what's your dynamic? How do you work? Like, give us a sense of your relationship together. That'd be interesting.
So we're a couple, and we never know if people know that or not. We always feel like we have to announce it.
You've just announced it on the Spaceship Earth podcast. They are a couple.
Yeah, it's official. But yeah, we work really fluidly together, and I think there's something really nice about being a couple, which means like you don't have to lay down any groundwork, because we sort of know how to communicate with each other anyway. So generally, like, we collaborate on most things, even if one of us takes the lead. So sometimes we do things separately, but we'll always bring the other person in at the end to like feedback and check, and it's just quite a fluid process. Like, every project we do it slightly differently, I think.
Yeah, and like we have like Joe said, like we have a constant feedback loop with each other. So like, I think originally like Joe's would do kind of a lot of stuff to do with Instagram, and then I'd have skills elsewhere. But we're always kind of working to kind of bring each other in. And as we've gone forward, we've kind of
merged,
and like I think our skill set, like they've kind of like been strengthened by working with each other. So we're almost like we just work very collaboratively across a lot of different projects. And
yeah, and I would say that I'm definitely a lot more messy and experimental all over the place, and like Rich is quite like technical, and he has lots of skills that I don't have, and like you're a lot more technically skilled. So together it's like you hone the mess that I make.
Yeah.
That's been good because that's kind of forced me to work quicker and be more messy at the same time. So it's kind of like helped me to try and change the way I originally was designing a long time before this, So it's kind of worked well, I think.
And did you ever have? Because I know, I work with my partner. We work together, and do you ever have have you ever had moments on the journey where you've gone, is this right? Or has it always felt right? Or has there been moments where you've gone, maybe we're putting too much into this? I'm just curious. But
I think there's definitely been times where it's been hard, like not in terms with each other, but we can't switch. We find it very difficult to switch off. And
yes.
I think it's like if one of us has an idea, we have to kind of learn to be understanding when the other person kind of doesn't want to talk about adapt, but doesn't want to talk about climate change 24/7.
Yeah, that could be exhausting, right?
And then also trying to look after each other, so we're not. And then we'll find we'll read something, we're like, oh god, that's really terrifying, and then we'll say we have like a WhatsApp chat with each other, which is called adapt notes, which we'll send it on to, just because we don't want to talk about it at the moment. And you just before you go to bed, you'll look at your WhatsApp and be like, oh no, something. We're like, oh crap.
Yeah. Read something, not climate related before bed.
Yeah, it's definitely recommended.
Yeah, what about you as well? Because you have kids, don't you, too?
Me, yes. Yeah, I have 3 children. So yeah, I think it's just interesting, this, this integrated life, I guess it's sort of how I would frame it, so I've over the years, I've had my moments where I've found it extraordinarily difficult to separate the issues and the complexities and the fears that I'm working with, and to keep the space in the home away from them, or particularly with the kids. And you sort of, you make loads of mistakes and you kind of like learn as you go. But at the same time, I've also had that kind of dance between wanting them to understand the sort of brokenness of how we go about things in the world, so it's like, so that they can see, they can understand that, there are other ways that we can be doing things. So it's a bit of a dance. And as I say, and my wonderful partner Seema has been, she gets the, she's it was interesting when you were talking about it, because so I'm definitely the sort of messy, chaotic, and she will help put some order, but it different. We've got very different skill sets. We don't collaborate, I think, in the way that you guys do, but we're a solid unit in terms of getting our work, working, and our family, because we've become quite integrated in, and how we we basically work from home a lot of the time. And so I don't know, it's funny, it brings me back to the sort of, I don't know if you follow Charles Eisenstein's work, and I guess this is more sort of Buddhist principles, but the stories of interbeing and the stories of the separation of the self from the natural world, from community. And I've often feel that so much of modern, inverted commas, sort of, modern human living is so separate. It's been so separated, that actually, the messiness of a more integrated way of working, whether that's, working with your family or your partner, and I think that's actually, there's so much joy in that as well. And it is complicated, because I think because we've been sort of led to believe that that's not what you do, almost, but I think there's something quite, if there's something there in the way that you can work or be more integrated with your partner and family. So I think it's amazing,
So I'd say definitely. Obviously I think they had their ups and downs as well. But like Charles and Ray Eames were, created like huge amounts of like beautiful work, and like did some really amazing projects together. And I think they were both very different, but kind of integrated their way of working really well. And I think obviously there was troubles within that, but I think they kind of showed that if you have 2 people with different skill sets, you can do pretty amazing things. And again, like, you don't always need to switch off or be confined to certain times of working. And but it's about the stigma, because like a lot of people do always like, even sort of ask us about us working together, kind of be like, oh, are you sure that's like, are you okay? Like, how do you do it? Like, it just works.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting, and I think also because of what we've been experiencing in these last few months, I think these kinds of I'm imagining, I have no data, but I'm imagining that there are probably more folks who've been, those of us that have been able to be indoors or work from home or whatever. And I know that's only a few of the population, but who I'm sure have been having these thoughts and conversations. And could they be doing more with each other? Could they even work together? You know what I mean? Because I think it's like, and there'll be others who go, I can't do this. Like, get me out of here. I've been hearing stories of kind of divorces and weird affairs going on over FaceTime and stuff. God, some crazy things that have been going on apparently during lockdown. So listen, let's get in, because you guys, I mean, you're quite prolific, I would say, in your work. I mean, there's a real, as I say, there's always a real energy around what you're doing and the initiatives that you do, and you can see that you're experimenting a lot, because some of your stuff is quite action led, and some of it, you've been doing some exhibition work in the past. You're trying to sort of you're starting to connect up. You had this climate blowout thing planned. I mean, so just tell me a bit about, and just for the listeners, I guess, some of the initiatives you've been doing maybe over the last year, which you're particularly, I guess, that have been interesting, big learnings, or maybe are pointing away towards more things you want to do. Because you've gone from things like, the We've Got Mail thing to Don't Be a Fossil Fuel to the Sadness is a No-Go Zone, which I'd like to talk about as well. But they're all quite different, aren't they? And can you just share a bit about some of these projects and why you were doing them and what you learned from them?
Yeah, I think what you just said about them all being very different is definitely how we work. Because first of all, I mean, for us, we like to always try different things and different ways of working. At the same time, it's like the idea of being, you're not confined to only having sort of one way of working to create a solution for something. We can really be versatile, and we can collaborate with loads of different people to kind of do anything that kind of we think will hopefully communicate a certain topic in the best way. So I guess, there was the Don't Be a Fossil Fuel campaign, which is when we just really started. And now it's trying to get people to switch to renewable energy in a really fun, exciting way. And we learned a lot from doing that. It was like, it got people kind of interested in us. It wasn't the most successful campaign, because getting people to switch is really difficult, but we just learned a lot, and we got to try a lot from that. And then I guess fast forward a while, I guess I want a really big project that kind of raised the DAP's profile a lot, was our Sadness is a No-Go Zone exhibition, which took place at the Opening Gallery in Peckham. And that was last summer, just under a year ago. So it was sort of the beginning of August. And it initially started as just Josie and I wanted to basically, we saw all these amazing designers within our community, artists doing really cool things. And we kind of thought, I'm sure a lot of them want to be talking about climate change, especially as last summer was such an important summer for the climate movement, but they didn't have an output, didn't have a platform to do it. So we were like, all right, okay, why don't we just start this off on Instagram, and we get loads of people. We'll create a series of slogans, because language is a big part of what we do. Series of fun slogans based on a range of topics, from energy, rewilding, and travel. And we sort of put these slogans out and be like, do you just want to create some work based on it? Do you want to create a poster? You can do kind of what you want. And then it just snowballed. And then again, we found people were just so excited and willing to do it. And so we got big, people, we ended up reaching out to people beyond our community who we just really admired as designers. And then basically it all came together, and we had 50 artists in total. And then we rented out the Copeland Gallery in Peckham, which after renting it out, we realised was just absolutely huge space, which we were I don't know how we're going to fill this. How are we going to create enough work? Because alongside the 50 artists, and Josie and I had to create some art pieces, and then bring other artists in who would maybe do some installations. We had, Urbo Greens, who created a micro farm in there. So he was growing pea shoots, sunflower shoots, and then giving food out to people. And it just kind of had a week. It was just over a weekend, and it just was really great with the shop that was going on there. A couple of workshops, and that was just a really big thing. And I think we got quite good press off that, and that kind of like helped give Adapt a bit of a platform, and kind of it was also a good time for me and Joe to kind of not showcase what we do, but like really have fun by being like, we've always wanted to do this. We've always wanted to create this huge exhibition. So let's just go and do it. And we kind of figured it out as we were going along. But that was like a really good fun. So that was like our first big project, I think.
Yeah.
And then
there's something there's something in that approach, and I think some of the sort of when I look back and some of the things I've been up to the last few years as well, it's like when you sort of put something out or create some experience in the real world that tends to sort of push you beyond, puts you into a slightly uncomfortable place in terms of the constraints and the pressures or whatever, but it tends to be those moments where then these it sort of takes things to a different level, opens up new possibilities from doing these things. There's something I think about challenging ourselves sometimes, right, with these ideas, that helps us then, sort of something else kind of sort of starts to sprout from that energy. So it looked great, and you can access that still online, can't you? A lot of the work. And
yeah, definitely. So there's the Sadness website, but it's easy if you just go for it to adapt-climate.world, and then you can see all our projects on there, and then you can click through to the Sadness website, see the artists that are involved, and see some good photos and stuff of the space. Yeah. And then I try to think. So when after that, where do we go? So that was like in August, and then throughout the winter, when things had kind of calmed down a bit, we partnered with the Green New Deal group.
Yeah, and we did a climate change speed dating event at the Tate Modern as well.
Oh yeah.
Tell us about that.
This is something that we've had. It's been one of our favourite ideas for a really long time, and we've only tested it briefly at a festival before. But the idea that you're sort of forced into 3 courses of conversation about climate change in a really relaxed, funny and inviting way. And you could be partnered with someone that you don't know, and you have to have this conversation. Whereas a lot of people actually feel more comfortable having a conversation about something like climate change, it seems, with a stranger than they do with their mum or their partner. So, basically, it was at a Tate Lates. We partnered with a drag queen called Portia, who dressed up in a Cilla Black-esque way, and did some hilarious comparing of the whole evening to an audience. And then we had a selection of people coming up and being partnered, sat down. We sort of decorated it like a French bistro style, like cheesy flowers on the table, like check tablecloths. We had 3 different courses of conversations. We had a starter, main course, and dessert. So the starter was...
Tell us about these. How did that work?
So there were questions and answers, there were scenarios and role play. There was a task that they had to do about writing a haiku about climate change together. And then once they'd written the haiku, they'd have to flag down Portia, who would then read it out to the whole audience, which was the best part, I think, of the whole evening. People were really inventive. We didn't think they'd get behind it, but they actually came up with some really great ones. And then the final course dessert was climate change pickup lines. So they could read the pickup lines to each other and then make one themselves at the end. But it was really fun. And some people, again, we really didn't expect people to get behind it. We thought they'd be quite embarrassed. But some people were sat there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just like continuing the conversation. Some people left together. So we didn't intend it to have a genuinely romantic aspect, but it ended up being that way. But yeah, no, it was really good.
And did you get any sense of people, like, I mean, those that took part and their kind of level of engagement with climate at this point, and like, did what happened through the process? Were you able to sort of gauge, like, whether how people actually, did people shift or deepen their understanding through this sort of process, or anything? Did you get a sense of any kind of sort of impacts that this thing made on people beyond obviously being a bloody good night? But
yeah, no, I think definitely, because I mean, so obviously there was people there who kind of veered off from from the role playing stuff, and we're having genuine conversations about climate change and the climate crisis. But there was one in particular where this man who sat down and he didn't have a partner originally, and I remember he looked at the menu and stuff, and then he's kind of talking to me about the fact that, like, I mean, he wasn't like denying climate change, but he kind of was like very like, not acknowledging it, kind of talking about this as like, he was open to being part of it, but he was kind of putting it down at the same time. And then he got paired with another quite a young guy, and what was that, Jason?
And he basically thought that it was real dating and that he'd be paired up with a woman. So he got quite angry. He was an older gentleman, and he was like obviously of a certain mindset, and he wasn't very happy when we paired him with a young man. Obviously, we weren't partnering anyone particularly romantically at all, just to get people together to talk. So yeah, he wasn't very happy when we put a young man in front of him. But
they carried on talking, and then I think had quite a good debate about climate change. And then I think they both left pretty happy, to be honest. And they were there for a good sort of 40 minutes or so. And so I think that was something where it showed that hopefully, like, what we hope it was like by what was on our cards kind of gave them like talking points and help them kind of find common ground throughout.
It's so interesting. I did my old collaboration consultancy, Swarm Partners. We did a piece of work with, I think it was in 2014, but with the D&AD on trying to, again, sort of encourage conversation or exploration of climate change in the advertising design industry, which at the time was, no one talked about it at all. But we ended up doing this. We ended up doing a kind of this kind of gathering. We did a lot of interviews first of all, and with folks, and then we did a kind of gathering where we brought different people from different agencies and talents into a space, and we brought in kind of Kevin Anderson, climate scientist, which probably wasn't a good idea in 2014 because he scared the shit out of everyone. But we worked with Jonathan Rosen, who'd just done this. He was working for this thing called what was it called, the Social Brain, and they just done this big piece of research on British people's how we do or don't talk about climate change, and they did this big piece of research, and what they found was that on average, I think people would talk about it for only up to about 5 minutes, and when it got to then it becomes uncomfortable, and so people just stop talking about it, and so there's this whole thing of like this uncomfortable, that we're not very good with uncomfortable conversations. And this time, I say this was obviously prior to it becoming, I guess, a much bigger issue. But I still sense that it's, even in my own, inquiries and seeing networks and peers, it's still such an uncomfortable, when you get to this sort of, I think when people sort of understand really what's driving this thing, it becomes so uncomfortable because you feel that you're also implicated in it. I don't know, but you finding, obviously you had people chatting for quite some time, and I'm just wondering again about these kind of approaches that you're exploring. They help us to sort of break through this kind of uncomfort.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that we recognised like so early on was just that it's not dinner party conversation, it's taboo. People get angry if you bring up climate change and social situations. It's almost like bringing up politics on Christmas Day. They just don't respond well to it, most people. And we found this with our families who like very switched on and engaged, like liberal mindset, and it almost, the conversation got quite swiftly changed quite often when we brought it up, and we were just wondering like, how do we change that, because it starts at home. You need to figure these things out with your family and your friends, and then take that onto wider groups. So I think we're still learning, but the speed dating in particular was good because we literally gave people 3 courses of questions that they could stick to, so they weren't left out on their own. And I think what the big fear that a lot of people have when they don't want to be confronted with a conversation about climate change is not feeling like an expert. And when we talk about politics, like the Brexit debate is a perfect example. Everyone was glued to the news and was updated with what was going on. Everyone felt empowered and they felt like experts because it was impossible not to pick up on what was going on every day. But climate change isn't present in the media that we take in every day, and it's not present in conversations. So I think people want to get off the conversation topic quite quickly, often because they don't want to be put in a situation where they don't have the right things to say, or they might say the wrong thing, amongst other things. But I do think that is a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think like as well, what we try to do in that at the same time is when we're doing the speed dating, what we've kind of tried to do is obviously there's the role play, so you can kind of like put yourself in it's still in your shoes, but in a slightly different pair, you know, so you can kind of imagine things a little bit differently. And your kind of like real sort of raw emotion in the conversation is kind of taken out of it a little bit, because we found that when you're talking to family, friends, and stuff, like it took us a long time to kind of realize how calm you need to stay when talking about something you're so angry and frustrated about, because that often can stop you maybe even asking questions about how the other person's engaging with it and learning about their position, so you can kind of then find a common ground in the middle. Instead you're kind of just, you know, going mad, like ranting about this isn't good, this isn't good, this isn't good, and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to carry this on, and then you're kind of exhausted and you don't know how to carry it on, and you're just angry, so the conversation doesn't necessarily go anywhere. So I think like, yeah, trying to like continue to ask questions and a bit of role play, trying to understand different scenarios. That's 5 minutes sounds like, yes, it very rings true, I think.
And who do you sense is engaging in your work and this type of approach? Just give me, I mean, I know it's hard to say, but is it what sort of folks? Is it a younger, you know, is it speaking to any specific? I mean, it feels very sort of, you know, it's very kind of fresh, your work, but is it, because I guess where I sit honestly is the complexity of climate change, and I'm sort of you know, I just see like it's different age groups have got so much different kind of, you know, the way that people think about the world is so different compared to, like, you know, how long you've been on this earth, you know, what you lived through, your perception of what is, you know, what you're owed versus what you're, you know what I mean? It's quite complex, isn't it? And I think that's why it's so difficult, this stuff, because some of us are able to sort of open our mind, I think, to the sort of complexity of the problem and the need for kind of radical shifts. Others are very closed and don't see themselves as part of the problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious as to what you're finding and who is engaging in your work.
Well, it's really interesting actually, because right at the very beginning, when we first started, our aim was to just cast our net as wide as possible and trying to approach as many people as possible. We realised that the way we were doing things just wasn't suitable for an older audience, or or even a much younger audience. And we ended up just doing things how we felt we wanted to do them, and through that gained quite naturally the audience that we have, just not trying to force any different language, but just doing things in exactly the way that feels right to us. So our audience ranges from about 16 to 40. Main bulk probably sits around in the middle of that age group, and funnily enough, I think it's 74% women in our like core community. So we are still trying to figure out why what we're doing appeals more to women than men. Like we have no idea at the moment. It's interesting, and I think there's a lot of debate about women being more engaged in the environmental movement anyway. But
I mean, it's so interesting, because I mean, my I can really, as you're talking, that's making sense to me. I mean, even just, you know, going out on climate strikes, school strikes, is inherently more women and girls that are on the streets. I see, at least my own experiences. I had an amazing designer who's been Anna Murray from Paternity, who's been on this podcast, but she talks a lot about the rise of the feminine, you know, that's very connected. She believes in the sort of what we're seeing, the sort of feminine energy from the planet. You know, there's kind of sort of the waters, if you like, of our planet are sort of, you know, have become so toxic and polluted from a sort of masculine way of showing up. She sort of really believes that it's sort of, and again, doesn't see it as in girl boy, but sees it much more in sort of feminine, a feminine energy. But it's interesting what we're witnessing. I think this kind of this sort of feminine rising maybe around all of this climate work. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but just
we really agree with you. I mean, I think that Mothers of Invention put it best as like it's a man-made crisis with a feminist solution. It's like
right.
Obviously, like in terms of you saying this, it's not like obviously I think there needs to be a lot more women in positions that are going to be able to solve this and
sort the bloody mess out. Just get the bloody old gits out of the way, for God's sake. Just get the old white men. Can we just get rid of them now? It's just
exactly. But maybe still be part of that. But they have to kind of take a more feminist approach, I think, and I think that's kind of where it's at. But so there needs to be system change here.
And we were doing research recently, and we found that someone had done a study and found out that when women are present on boards of decision makers for policies around climate change, especially in community and like more local levels, there are more long-lasting policies to do with climate change that treat people more fairly, that make people more happy, and that people undertake for longer periods of time. So it's just actually quite amazing learning about the different sort of viewpoint that women have when it comes to making policy, and how climate justice is such a huge part of that, and making sure that people are actually treated fairly and healthy as well, and not it being a technical solution, but more.
Look at exactly, and you look at even just COVID-19 and coronavirus. I mean the 6 countries that are got the worst death rates and spread of coronavirus are all run by white populist men. It's like even just in terms of there's it's pretty stark now, these the brokenness of these sort of command and control systems in trying to respond to what is these systemic crises that are deeply about how humans show up, right? And because you were talking about COVID, you were about to do your climate action blowout, weren't you? That was on the cards.
So that was supposed to take. Well, that was going to take place in August, wasn't it? We delayed it for a bit, and then we decided to postpone it, hopefully until next year. And it was basically we wanted to find a way where people could really engage with the climate crisis, take action, not in the way that continue with business as usual, but within their usual places. So within their workplace, within their school, within their community, and then we kind of basically send out all these sort of different packs based on their industry and how they describe themselves, and then we'd hopefully give them the tools to kind of create their own action, create their own ways of communicating, and we kind of like really try and facilitate that and have a week-long event of great climate action.
Yeah, and it came from basically feedback from people that many people didn't feel represented in a lot of the mainstream climate activist movements, and just couldn't possibly see themselves feeling comfortable even sometimes in some of the situations that people put themselves in. And we just wanted to make it a free-for-all in terms of inviting people in. And I think the key thing that we were really excited about testing, and we did get a huge uptake of people registering to take part in the first week that we announced it, and obviously it came off quite soon after that because of Corona. But what we were doing is asking people to send us a small amount of very basic information about themselves, where they worked, what industry they worked in, whereabouts they lived, and we would try and tailor as best we could a starter pack for them. So it wasn't a one size fits all, you just get a 1-page document and you have to abide by the rules. It was take all of these are pieces of advice and tips, and like you can do whatever you want with the information and the advice that we're giving you. So it was either maybe they wanted to raise funds, maybe they wanted to spread awareness, maybe they wanted to do a big action or event or something themselves, and we would like support and help them, and we'd be there to like talk through any ideas that they had as well. But the whole idea was initially supposed to just be in London. We're like, maybe just test it on a small scale, and then we realised that people were registering from all around the world. So we're really gutted that it didn't get to happen, because it will happen in the future, but it could have ended up being a global thing. So hopefully those people will still want to. But yeah.
What do you with all of that, and obviously, we've had the pandemic, we've got the the rise of into the real public psyche of Black Lives Matter that's been happening in the last few weeks. We've got, it's just sort of, it feels that there's all these crises that are starting to sort of show up, and again, have probably, we know they've always been there, but they've been hidden, or to many of us, and we're sort of starting to experience. And I think, you talk to climate justice, and we could talk a bit about that, because I know that's a thing that lots of people are sort of people who maybe aren't as immersed are sort of starting to hear this term. And and I think many of us who've been working in these kind of things, have always sort of deeply seen them as interconnected, and it's humans and our sort of natural world together. Without, we're one and the two, and so you can't confront one really unless you confront the other. But how do you feel about all this stuff that's kind of I use this phrase a lot, unraveling, and funny enough, I saw I saw a thing you put up called the cool zone, which for me is funny. When I looked, I was like, oh yeah, it means we're in the great unraveling. It's this kind of space. But how do you, where are you guys at with all these because it's a year ago, right? I mean, I think I last bumped into you, Rich, on the streets with XR. I don't know when it was, but so much has happened, and now so many of these other big kind of social injustice and economic crisis and all these things are sort of where do you feel the climate work for you is heading? And do you sense that you're going to be trying to make more connections in all of these things, or are you just you're gunning along with your vision? I'm sort of curious. I know there's a lot in that, but I'd love to explore that a bit with you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think like what's happened from the start of this year, like for anyone like would notice that there's just huge injustice, whether it's coronavirus and the communities, with BAME people being having higher infection rates and death rates, to more higher number of BAME people working in essential jobs. That's like a clear injustice. And obviously the fact that it's kind of caused a lot of the spreading has been from people traveling, and like globalization, like our ability to move very quickly, which I mean it's basically obviously because the fact that if you're in a position where you can sort of travel the world very quickly, whether it's for holiday or work, that's isn't really caused by everyone. So there's like that injustice. And then the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, that's just showed huge injustice within the system. And then I think that what's funny about all the three are there's definitely the connection, like within the fact that with high levels of BAME people being more affected and having higher death rates to a thing, coronavirus, and then the government sort of said they were doing a report and researching into it, but not acknowledging the environmental factors in that. When I say environment, in terms of like the space around them, so whether it's like respiratory problems caused by air pollution, which has led to obviously having higher the virus affecting you in a certain way more. But then in their report, there was loads of third parties who did a lot of research within like the Muslim community explaining this and what they thought, and they left that out of the report, which shows not giving people a voice when they're supposed to. And then that also shows the massive connection between coronavirus, climate change, and BAME and the BAME communities. And then I think like you start to just understand when there's so many different ways of looking at this, and you start to understand that it's so all connected, which a lot of people talk about. So it'd be wrong of us to not. I mean, we've always tried to include that in our work, but I think we've definitely taken a step forward to really, really try and hammer that home now. And like all our projects kind of going forward, and what we're going to do is really making sure that is a big focal point by um, connecting people from different areas, from different communities, and different industry to kind of realize that the climate crisis does relate to everything, and then trying to find different ways of communicating and solving that. If that makes sense. I mean, I think I got a bit like angry when I was talking about that because it's just really frustrating. But I think
I think you're bang on, and I think that was what I was exactly, and I think that's the thing. It's just it does again. It's super complex and difficult to articulate as well, something which is so complicated and shows up in people's lives in such different ways, and but I think it's great to hear that you're seeing the thinking about how to, because my sense is exactly that. It's like, I think any of us that are sort of working to try and accelerate these kind of shifts, is to try and find ways for our work to join the dots, for people to see the interconnections, and the injustices that sit underneath all of this stuff. I think it's required, and I actually think that's the only way, to be honest, is that we're going to be making the kinds of shifts needed, is to really show the interconnectivity, and the interconnections and the injustices that sit around what can often be seen as carbon emissions. Do you know what I mean? And industry, and of course that's that's a big chunk of it. But actually, it's a systemic way of organizing the human race. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of really at the heart of it. So it was really interesting. And can you talk about the cool zone? Because I think people might quite like that. I saw that popped up.
Yeah, so the cool zone is just a term that's sort of being popularized at the moment, about essentially a period of time which has happened several times through history, but that's not particularly cool to live through, but will be cool to read about in the future. And it's also a period of time where like huge shifts of change can happen. Cool zones are usually quite chaotic, times of political unrest and upheaval. And at the moment, like you said, so many crises happening at the same time, it's hard to keep track. But with that, with everyone's heightened engagement and like heightened discomfort in their situation, brings the ability to push through huge societal changes and really like grabbing this sort of situation by the horns is the best thing to do. And I think sustained and prolonged activism is the only way that we'll see this period of turmoil through in a positive way. So with the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, like amazing, already prolonged, and is causing huge change that if it hadn't have happened, we would never have seen. And it's not enough, but you can see that people are so engaged and active now that I feel very positively that we're going to see huge shifts coming in the future. It's almost impossible to ignore. But yeah, the cool zone essentially is that period of time where the turmoil is happening before the big change.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's good. I've been calling it the Great Unraveling, which is probably a bit more disturbing, but yours sounds cooler. It's funny. So there's this thing, just this thing I saw this week. I don't know if you've come across this. I saw it on. So there's a guy called Frederick Laloux who's written a lot about a lot from organizations and business, how they shift the organization to working at a very high level of consciousness, of human consciousness, and basically he calls them teal organizations, and it's a book that's been sort of it's it's been around for a few years, but it's lots of sort of leadership groups and business starting to embrace it. It's how you shift from a sort of old command and control model of organizing to something which is much more based on how living systems and nature and all this kind of great stuff. So anyway, he this week I saw has just been with his wife have just released this idea they're calling the week. I don't know if you've come across it. So they basically got to this, and I thought I'd bring it up because I think I don't know, it's just interesting. I wonder what you thought about it. It's like they basically come to this conclusion that with climate, that we're all people are sort of understand that more and more people understand the science. They understand the what is the time, the urgency for shifts, the impacts that are happening, the feedback loops, that all can see that we're heading into a really 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 dodgy direction, and yet still can't quite seem to change anything, I mean, beyond just the basic individual behaviors, but can't seem to accept that another way of showing up and organizing is needed. And so they do a lot of work, there again, and I was sort of drawn to this work because it's that's why I talked a little bit about grief with you, like the role of grief with humor, because there's many that believe until you do some sort of descent, till you sort of let yourself go to the bottom of, like people talk about U theory, but you allow yourself to sort of let go of your worldview that was very caught up in what is driving climate change and ecological collapse or whatever, until you sort of do that kind of descent, which is of grief and is uncomfort and is fearful and scary. There's this sense that you can't come back up, like you can't break through to being able to see the world, a different world is possible. Does that make sense? And so that kind of framing, and XR will use that. They'll, lots of people use that model of, it's got lots of different presencing theory, U theory, whatever. But the idea is with everything, until you can't have a new paradigm until you're allowed to let go of everything that you thought the old world was. So they've been saying, well, what? So they sort of believe in that model, and so they've been playing with this thing, which is like this idea, and they call it the week, which is going to be like 3 bits of content, I think film content, and the idea is that will take you through the crises of climate and ecological breakdown. But it's done over a period of a week, and you do it at home, and you do it with friends and family and stuff. But you create, I think it's called the week, because my understanding is like you'll see the first bit of content. I think it's like 45 minutes or something, and then it will gradually, you're going to go on a journey through the week, which is going to be quite difficult. But then it will take you back up at the end of it, and you do it in your family or with peers or whatever. And there's online groups, and they've been prototyping it apparently over the summer with about a bunch of folks and friends and whatever. And apparently it's been like, they think there's something really interesting. It's allowing people to have that breakthrough, to sort of feel like shit. We've really got to like get on with this, and so I was really curious about it. I don't think there's much online. I think they're going to launch it properly soon, but I was just curious about that model with the work that you do, which is, saying you've really focused in on humor and this playfulness. And I just wondered where you sat with these other, these ideas of grief, or, that do we have to have an element of that in order to, and again, it's not one or the other, but I was just curious as to where this stuff sits with you and your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, that sounds like a really great thing, and like
it does, doesn't it? It blew my mind. I was like, yes, that sounds good.
But I think, yeah, I mean, like you have to, when you can like obviously ignore the crisis, and I think a lot of people do because they don't want to go into that sense of feel that sense of grief, or feel that sense of everything's kind of been taken away, or what could happen, whether it's like just your luxuries in life go, or whether like there is huge disaster that could happen. But I guess like kind of once you accept that, which can be difficult, then you can once you're over that, you're kind of clear of it, and you've accepted the fact. Like we recently, I think we're planning another post. We're recently looking into the IPCC's like worst case scenario, which has been debated. Reading about that was like, oh, like shit, this is like how bad.
You're not reading that before bed, were you, Rich? Again, not.
I think it was like a morning job, but like that's the thing. You understand how bad it could be, so then you're like, okay, well, that doesn't. It's good that is going to exist, whatever. So then okay, how do we work, and then we come up with solutions, and then I guess that's when humour comes in for us. It's like, okay, well, how do we now communicate this worst case scenario? Even though there's a lot of debate around how bad it will actually get, is in a really funny way that people can digest, and then you can like start working on it. And I think for anything, like all systems, like once you understand that everything is going to change whether you like it or not, and if then you can start to move forward. And I think people in positions of power who are really who are very smart and understand the climate crisis, it's not that they don't, are just trying to hang on to kind of and keep everything going business as usual because it kind of suits them now. And like maybe as we progress and like if society has to, this is obviously talking in the Western world, where obviously in sort of like the global south, like, and even around parts of the UK, everywhere, like things have changed dramatically and people's lives have really changed, but like if you're talking about for someone like, for example, if we talk about Boris, he maybe doesn't want his life to change, and maybe in time when society has to move from different parts of the UK, maybe everyone moves to the Northern Hemisphere, he might continue to try and force a way of life that feels like normal. But so I don't know. Yeah, I agree. Just breaking everything down and breaking yourself down until you've realised that things are just going to be that way, they're going to change or whatever, and trying to come up with the best solution and trying to adapt as quickly as possible is really important.
Yeah, and I think the idea of like exactly what you were saying, like lots of people don't really want to come to terms with the fact that they are going to go through a grieving process, whether they understand it as grief or not. They know the emotions that they could be setting themselves up to feel. And I think the best way that we found for the people that are in our community anyway, and everyone's totally different. Some people respond really well to like hard-hitting, straight up, quite like shocking information. And some people need to be invited in a bit more gently. So we think that humour is a good way to invite people in and not be scared of the like grief process that they're gonna encounter at some point. And our work's honest, and we still list the like hard truths, but for some people they just need a bit more of a gentle nudge in. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think that's the thing. As I guess I think this is a space that I'm always exploring and interested in, and speaking to you guys, thinking about the role of humour in this is, what again, how, because where I go a lot with this is that we're moving, and we've probably always been it, but it's allowing a sense of not knowing. So if we can culturally get used to not knowing and and being okay with sort of a sense of not knowing and being able to kind of function more, a bit more grounded in the present, a bit more kind of, rather than always thinking, these huge long-term ways that we tend to look at life, well, I'm going to do this. But actually, if we could make more of the days and the, of the time we have, and the desire to sort of participate more in this, in life as it's happening. So but that's such a shift, because we've all been many of us have been, brought up, educated, institutionalized through, colleges and work to sort of believe in certainty. Do you know what I mean? So I'm sort of curious about, I think that's one thing I'm really exploring, is how do we use things like humor and creativity and culture and art to help people maybe feel more comfortable with this, this more uncertain world. So I don't know if that's speaks to you at all.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how everyone builds off the back of COVID-19, because it showed how uncertain everything is and how your way of life can completely shift just like that. And I guess like we're kind of uncertain the fact that there probably will be a second wave at some point. So obviously that, again, like that uncertainty, and I don't know if people really want to face that, but like the uncertainty that it could all go back and change again. So it's quite interesting. We're actually living in a very uncertain time. So then I think what you just said, like in terms of how humour works, is that we haven't, like we've kind of been playing with that in terms of the climate crisis, but I guess we're kind of really going to be figuring that out over the next few months and however long, how to communicate this in a very even more sort of uncertain and fragile world is going to be quite interesting for us, and I think really quite fun in a way without it being that fun. But
yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? Because I think that's there's this it's a very fine line between dark and light, fear and joy. You know what I mean? It's there is a lot of potential, I think, for more spontaneity in this world that we've got. Do you know what I mean? And more joy to be able to actually see, the sort of the to be alive and to have all of this world around us is actually pretty sort of extraordinary. So there is something I think about. Yeah, I don't know. I keep coming back to that. Maybe the shifts were, and I get the sort of caveat of this. I get that there are, there's many people that aren't able to even think about or engage with these kind of issues because of the complexities of just being alive, right? Just getting through the days. But there are, I increasingly am looking to sort of parts of our society that I would call, have privilege, and I'll put myself in that space, haven't have the ability more to use our work and energy and influence to, throw spanners into the works, and show possibility and speak up and show more courage for these kind of shifts. And it does feel that, maybe part of the answer is actually, it's just a sort of maybe a different way of seeing and thinking about the world. And, what's the role of art and culture and creativity in helping people, make that connection. Because I think you've been seeing glimpses of it as well during this pandemic. Obviously, we've seen the reveal of all the injustice and all the suffering, but we've also seen the reveal of the sort of the sort of creativity. Do you know what I mean? And the joy and there's been, you've seen how people have kind of just got stuff done. Work with constraints and made shit happen on the ground. Do you know what I mean? And have sort of, we've seen a lot of love and heart also emerge through these months. So, and I think that's also really interesting, to work from.
I think like there's been obviously the massive like shift in terms of like the focus on locality and like being local whilst connecting that with a global issue is quite interesting, because that's what is kind of certain is what is like obviously around you right now. And it might be hard to envision what's happening across the world, or like, for example, whether it's climate change or coronavirus, how that's affecting things. But within your community, how many people possibly be getting infected, how many people are struggling to potentially make rent, what shops are open and stuff. And I guess like if you think about air pollution as well, that there might be really bad in your local area. So you can tackle what is certain is what you can feel and experience around you. So you can tackle it on a local level, and then hopefully that will has like global that can eventually work its way up and have improve things globally. Obviously that seems like a big stretch, but and everything can be scaled up, which I guess is like the I think like a big emphasis of like the Green New Deal is like keeping things really local and having loads of different ways of implementing things, and then just keep working to scale things up, learn from others, learn from different communities, which is exactly what we need to do when we scale up from like the UK, learning how to deal with climate change by learning how other countries are dealing with it. And I think, I think that kind of works in, just in terms of like what is certain is what is around you, and you can work to change that. So that kind of can scale up. And I think there has been a big emphasis on that in the last couple of months.
Yeah, and I'm completely with you. There's a phrase like 2 million villages. Do you know what I mean? Like small is beautiful, and actually we, human scale, and actually, it's much more around now that we're sort of opening up to that. And again, you think of sort of nature, and it doesn't commute. It's very localized. Do you know what I mean? So there is something interesting about that kind of awareness shift of noticing what's around you and in your community, and then we can have this this connectivity, to others and the wider world and planet, but what's that? Yeah, that sort of relationship between place and planet and country and world. That feel. Yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm very intrigued by where might we go with this kind of local energy that's sort of been activated during these months.
Yeah, and I think that you found what you've enjoyed locally, like you said about obviously with nature, everyone's kind of talking about it, and the different things you can routes with walking, everyone's kind of found to explore if they've been able to. Just you found so much joy in what's around you locally, which again works. You understand that you don't need to travel everywhere to see things. You don't need to have all these desires beyond. You can actually beyond where you are. You can actually take a lot of pleasure in smaller things. And that's not to say obviously you can enjoy other things, but you start to understand where enjoyment comes from. Enjoyment isn't necessarily, hopefully, going out and spending loads of money on whether it's clothes or even I don't know, going out. You find you can quite happily all sit in the park and bring your own food, and that kind of actually is a really great day. It's just an idea everything.
Yeah. No, well, I think there's this thing. Just I've been doing a bit of work for a brand I've been working with over the lockdown, and we've been chatting to lots of different people about what's been going on during these times for people. And one of these things that's come through so much from a bunch of folks was actually, when you can slow down, you can actually live sustainably. You know what I mean? You're actually able to prepare food, without having to go and buy packaged up stuff. You can actually prepare food, or you can actually sit and listen to nature, or you can try and grow something, or you can make something with your kid or whatever. And actually, so this kind of weird position we've got ourselves into is that when we crank the economy up and it's let's get back to business as usual, it's this super fast way of life that this consumerist system has emerged to serve the speed. Do you know what I mean? So you're grabbing everything on the go. You've never got time for anything. So it's all of the energy and materials and resource that goes into supporting this fast life, is actually, and then this idea that we can greenify that, it's sort of nonsense. You can't, it's almost, you know what I mean? It's this kind of unless we slow down, it's almost impossible to live a low impact life. I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was just, for me, that's just really interesting that people are starting to go, okay, yeah. So do you know what I mean? It's can we go at the speed we were going and, live this kind of greenified lifestyle? I mean, personally, I think it's kind of almost pathological to believe you can, but it's a tricky one.
It's so true, because I feel we were feeling really positive, especially a couple of weeks into lockdown when it first sort of took us by surprise, that the first things that people sort of did were do their gardens and learn how to cook different recipes to keep themselves entertained, and the amount of awareness about nature in their people's back gardens. And the minute that all of that fast-paced life was taken away, the very first things that a lot of people turned to were sustainable living behaviors. So exactly like you said, listening to nature, cooking, making your own food, and it wasn't difficult for people. And I think that's just that's how we should naturally be. And I felt quite strongly actually that there was going to be quite a rejection of life going back to normal. And I think a lot of people are keen to stay home more and not travel so far and stay slow, because it doesn't feel comfortable to go back. I think there are some people that prefer a fast-paced lifestyle and probably will rush back. I think the government in particular encouraging everyone to rush back to the shops was a real shock to the system, because we'd been living this quite well, obviously not people that were working on the front line or people in
sure
key worker roles, but everyone else was living quite a slow and contented life. So yeah, it felt really odd to be urged to go back to the high street and shop, because so many people haven't even thought about that, and so many people realise that they're content with less as well, which is such a nice lesson. I think we just have to wait and see in a couple of months, like how people decide to keep going, and whether they take some of this with them.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, isn't it? Because I'm I've been thinking a lot about this as well, and but ultimately it comes down to people, right? It's like, if people allow themselves, or because you either resist, you fight, and again, we've all got levels of ability to resist certain things depending on our own stories and context. But ultimately, again, if you've there's probably many people in this country around the world who have the ability now to sort of act on that new knowledge, you know what I mean, that have experienced something, some kind of reveal, and they realize they can actually do something. I sense a lot of people have also sort of realized that they're a lot more capable than they thought of doing things, so I think we're often sort of told that we've got to, again, it's the fear thing, you have to do all this, you have to do all of these things, otherwise, you're going to be screwed. But actually, you realise there's a lot more we can do than we thought we could. Do you know what I mean? As human beings, we're a bit more resourceful. And actually, everyone's going, "Oh, I'm quite creative. I didn't realise I could tinker with stuff." And I can actually. My children are actually able to learn without being sat in a room with 30 others every day. And I don't know. It's just interesting, isn't it? But it's this. I come back to this fear thing. Are we able to say, I'm going to resist doing that? Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to go back to that, or do we just get dragged into the machine? Who knows? But
Yeah, and I think like the idea of like work is going to be, especially because even though people can't start to come off furlough, whether they're able to go back to work, and obviously there's probably going to be a huge amount of redundancies. So like the idea, and there won't be a huge amount of jobs as we go through, I guess. Quite a difficult time going forward. So it'd be like, okay, well, how do we adapt? Like, what jobs are going to be more resilient to a pandemic or other things going forward? Like what jobs are essential? And I think that the world of work is going to be really interesting, and whether people will be willing to kind of retrain and find themselves in new roles. I think that like our ability to adapt, and hopefully that will also that element might look to kind of like a bigger system change, which would be quite interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, I think your work, is going to be quite important in these coming months. How can we laugh our way into a new adapted future? I saw something, actually just some of your work, because you are doing work that's also some partnership. You as I said, you talked about collaborations, but I saw some work you've just had on some billboard work you did recently. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we were asked by Ocean Bottle to basically take advantage of the lack of advertising going up in London at the moment, and do something to celebrate Earth Day and their World Oceans Day. Sorry, and their brief was basically to provide a bit of escapism from lockdown, but at the same time remind people that the oceans still need looking after. And I think it is really important, because especially when you're locked in your house and you're nowhere near the ocean, it's quite hard to remember that there's still a problem there. So our approach was to take sort of like a light-hearted idea of like holiday posters or like postcards. So we had "Wish You Were Clear" as one of them, to provide the escapism, but then also little hints at the state of the ocean, and like trying to get people to remember and to act on these issues that are still going on.
Yeah.
But obviously not to overload people, because especially when we were designing them, we're still fully in lockdown. And so it's more of a gentle sort of like ease in. But we had one with a picture of a plastic bag that said "Till we meet again," which is also a play on meeting up after lockdown.
Yeah.
And "Who says tomorrow never comes? Looking forward to the future beyond 2020, let's protect it.
And then
nice. I'll link to this in the, because I know it's all online, isn't it? I'll link it to it in the show notes.
But yeah, it was exciting to see our work on billboards. It's the first time that's happened, so we're
yeah, and I guess it just shows like people adapting. Like they were just like, well, we've been able to get hold of some cheap advertising space. Like, do you guys just want to have fun with it? You know, it wasn't even like anything promoting them necessarily or promoting us. It's like, let's just have some fun while it's cheap. So that was trying to get a message out. So I think that's like a good way of just kind of working within the constraints of lockdown.
Yeah. And that'd be a nice way to, if we could adapt outdoor advertising to not actually feature any advertising, but just to feature interesting art. That would be nice if we could get more of that going.
It's nice. And we drove past, was it near Earl's Court yesterday, and there's a huge illuminated blackboard and a huge billboard, and a huge paper billboard as well. And with like really striking Black Lives Matter design. And it was just so refreshing. Because normally we pass those and they're so overwhelming with like advertising. I just hope that the advertising companies allow some space for that to carry on.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Sure.
Yeah, we got to. As a guy, actually, I've just done a podcast with him. I'll get it out soon. With John Alexander, I don't know if you come across his work, but he's an ex ad guy that spent the last 10 years trying to explore how we shift from consumerism to citizenship. But his view is that, you know, advertising is just so pervasive that unless we literally create spaces for just get it out of our lives, he believes it's very hard for people to see that anything else is possible, because it's just so deeply, you know, again, embedded in us because it's coming at us from everywhere. It's just hard for you to see beyond it. So I think these kind of love these kind of takeovers and freeing up space for creativity and art, and you know, that's not got a it's not trying to point you to some form of purchase. We need more of that. More of that. So listen, guys, we're coming through. It's been fantastic to chat, and I will link out obviously to all your work. Is there anything else you want to share, or anything folks can do, or what would you anything you want to, ways for people to get involved in what you're up to?
So we've got quite a few things in the pipeline. A couple of them we can't talk about right now, but we will be hosting a couple.
Can we do as an exclusive? No.
We'll be hosting like a shop front exhibition. We're hoping to have like a little series of events in there as well, for about 2 months coming up this year in New Cross. So we've been very kindly given a shop space with a big shop window, and we're going to be having either weekly or fortnightly changeovers of the display in the front window, inviting people to take part, and basically putting climate messages in a high street shopfront situation. So that's nice. New Cross, and we'll be launching that really soon. So there'll be more information on that soon, but that'll be
over the next probably like for
August, September.
Yeah, we'll be around that time.
Nice.
Yeah. Keep a lookout for that. I think that'd be good fun for us and for everyone who wants to.
Sounds it.
But we'll be documenting it online as well, and like all the things that happen in the space. So yeah.
And best thing for folks is follow your Instagram, right? That's your.
Yeah, I'd say so. Definitely follow the Instagram if you want to keep up to date with what's going on. If you want to get new information, like all our new posts, like information that we're putting out, not just about us, but obviously the whole climate conversation is all through our Instagram. And then any past work we've done, you just head to our website, and then you can kind of see everything we've done and learn a bit more about us and how we kind of operate. And through that.
Amazing. Well, I'll link out to all of that. So anyway, I always close the show with this little posing this little thought to you. You know, this show is inspired by the spaceship Earth. This idea that we're shifting from sort of passengers to crew. So this idea of becoming crew. What is it right now to speak to you guys? Does that bring anything up?
I think for us, if we're like imagining ourselves and what we do, it's about being the guy with the loudhailer, sort of like passing on all the information that we take in. And I think for like everyone on a wider scale, it's being crew is about maintaining awareness and like ensuring that other people maintain awareness as well. Like the minute that we allow ourselves to sort of ignore what's going on, we lose so much ground. And I think that's for us, being crew is sort of like rallying the troops, making sure that we're all staying aware and staying positive.
Lovely.
And healthy as well.
Yeah, I guess just to add on that, like, everyone like just finding a way in your life to be kind of like, whether it's the climate crisis or how everything's interlinked, it's like doing your part, whether it's in your work or wherever else, to kind of just be improving the situation, like doing something that's having an effect rather than obviously just kind of ignoring it and not really taking part. I think be the crew in everything you do.
Nice. Thanks, guys. It's been lovely to talk to you. I love what you do, and we'll keep in touch, no doubt, when we might even see each other in real life at some point. It's brilliant what you do. I think your energy and your experimentation and the way the projects that you're putting out into the world are awesome. So keep doing what you do, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on. We've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been really good to just sit and talk for a while. Really enjoyed it.
It's good, isn't it? We need more talking about these things, I think, as well. And the humour. Maybe we'll have to think about some sort of like humorous, I was like audio and humour as well. Have you thought about doing a podcast? Get some. Yeah, we need some more comedy. Climate comedy, I think, is definitely something we need more of. But we can have a conversation. I've actually got some random ideas cooking, but we'll do this offline. I'll be in touch. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
No worries. So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Josie and Rich. What fantastic human beings they are. Check out their work. Get involved with Adapt Climate Club. Let's laugh our way into a better world. If you've got any questions, hit me up, dan@thespaceship.earth. You can follow us on the Instas now at thespaceship.earth. Do get in touch with any questions, any thoughts. Please do share the podcast if you like what you're hearing. If you know other people that might be into it, please do share. I'll repeat again, give us a rating or a review on Apple or Spotify or Google or Acast. It really does help more people find it. It'd be much appreciated if you give us a little bit of love. Until next time, take good care of yourself out there, look after others, and until next time, peace and out.